What is up, everybody? Welcome back, and let's break down the PBC event that took place this past Saturday night. And it was a jam-packed weekend for boxing. Many more recap episodes coming your way from the other events that took place this past weekend. But the PBC event that took so much criticism when it initially got announced, PBC, obviously Showtime going under and stepping away from the boxing business. PBC left without a home last year, ended up coming into some type of agreement, some type of pact with Amazon Prime, and this was their debut show. They took criticism from every person imaginable: promoters, fighters, fans, critics alike. Everybody was on their case, and on the card, on the bout card, as they had announced it, everybody was criticizing the fact that they had just thrown a bunch of fighters together for the sake of putting on their debut show. And the criticisms were out, and when you viewed this event, it had some amazing fights throughout the night. Well done by PBC. You gotta tip your hat to them, because their debut show with Amazon, I don't know about specific numbers as far as ratings, gate revenue, so forth, but when you watch these fights, it was packed. It looked packed. It was loud. The crowd was engaged. The crowd was into it, and the fights delivered. From top to bottom, the fights delivered. Even the two free fights that they put on before the paid portion began, which was Brian Mendoza and Serhiy Bohachuk, and I don't remember the other one. There was a card, I think it was Carmel Moten. Carmel Moten against the Anthony Cuba was the opponent, and he's a protege of Leo Santa Cruz. So those were the two free fights, and those were two very entertaining fights. Obviously, Carmel Moten is Floyd Mayweather's protege, and there's a lot of hype behind him, and this fight ended up going the distance. He ended up getting the unanimous decision win over Anthony Cuba. It was an 8-round fight, but very good work for the young prospect, and very good experience for both fighters, but especially for Carmel Moten, who has the hype train behind him right now and the notoriety going for him. So he stays on his winning ways. This was his third professional fight, and he's undefeated at this moment. From there, we ended up getting the WBC interim title fight between Serhiy Bohachuk and Brian Mendoza. If you guys remember, the original card had the main event slated to be TSZYU versus Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman, who at one point was on top of the welterweight division years ago. A Keith Thurman who has been involved in some very, very big fights in his own respect when he was campaigning at welterweight. This was going to be his debut at super welterweight, or in the 154-pound division, against none other than the man who's been dominating that division since Jermell Charlo stepped away. A man who wanted to get in the ring with Jermell Charlo, and the fight wasn't happening. Since Jermell Charlo, the last and the only undisputed champ at that division to date, vacated the titles after his showdown with Canelo last year. Because of the layoff, a lot of the organizations started stripping him, and his titles have been up for play. Two of those titles were on hand for this main event. Originally, it was one title. Keith Thurman ends up getting injured, leading to the fight. Sebastian Fundora and Serhiy Bohachuk were fighting for the interim title. Remember, Fundora was coming off of his knockout loss to Brian Mendoza. Brian Mendoza was coming off of the loss to TSZYU. Keith Thurman falls out. Sebastian Fundora is called to the main event to step in, which is a curveball for both fighters, because it was a last-minute replacement where neither one of the fighters really had much time to prepare for one another. And that's why the fight turned out the way it did. It was a bloodbath with some controversy to go along with it. With Sebastian Fundora moving up to the main event, Brian Mendoza got called, received the call, answered the call to step in for Fundora, an opponent that he had defeated, but he got the nod to go in against Serhiy Bohachuk for the interim version title. PBC made their moves. Mendoza answered a call and came short once again on his title aspirations as Serhiy Bohachuk outworked him and bested him on the free portion on the undercard of this card. On the undercard of this main event, Mendoza came up short once again. Serhiy Bohachuk is the interim champ of the WBC at 154 now. Waiting. Obviously was going to be waiting and in full attention of what was going to happen later that night between TSZYU and Sebastian Fundora, where the WBC title, which was vacant, was on the line, and TSZYU's WBO title was also on the line. Erislandy Lara, who's been fairly inactive. The whole 160-pound division is very unattractive and has been for the last few years, even when Demetrius Andrade was campaigning there. You have a unified champ in Alim Kanuli, Janibek. Then you have Erislandy Lara. And you have Jermall Charlo, who is still sitting with that WBC title, as far as I know. So Erislandy Lara fights a Michael Sarafa, who is a young fighter, who had Nonito Donaire on his corner, who had all the hype behind him, the youth versus experience, and he was the one to dethrone Erislandy Lara and announce himself to the world as the newly crowned middleweight champion. Erislandy Lara just popped him with that jab from the opening bell until the fight ended in round 2, where Michael Sarafa had no answers for the experienced Erislandy Lara, for the experienced Cuban fighter, who basically picked him apart with one punch. Picked him apart with the jab over and over and over again until he started bloodying him up, started staggering him, pushing him back, holding him in his tracks, and eventually the combination came where he knocks out Michael Sarafa. A lot of people said that Sarafa didn't answer the call, that he quit. Whether he did or he didn't, he got caught pretty good, didn't answer the ref's count, and that was all she wrote. Erislandy Lara retains his WBA title in the 160-pound division. Julio Cesar Martinez against Angelino Cordova was such an entertaining fight where they went back and forth with each other, where Angelino Cordova seemed to be getting the very best of the exchanges with Julio Cesar Martinez. Yet Cordova found himself hitting the canvas twice in round 3. They busted up each other fairly good. In one of the exchanges towards the end of the fight, Martinez ends up catching the best of the exchange to the left side of Cordova's jaw, the lower part of his cheekbone, and you immediately saw when they set each other apart, when they came apart from the exchange, his face swelling in intense fashion. A broken bone, a busted molar, maybe the cheekbone damage, but his face was swelling and swelling quickly. The decision went to Julio Cesar Martinez, where he successfully retained his WBC flyweight title. A fight that I was really looking forward to seeing was between Elijah Garcia in the middleweight division, who was supposed to be in line to fight. He was supposed to be in line for one of the titles. I think it was a WBA eliminator. And it was Elijah Garcia against Kyron Davis, who was a former David Benavidez opponent. Suffered a defeat at the hands of Benavidez. Kyron Davis and Elijah Garcia was going to be such a good matchup, which was going to basically get him knocking on the door of a title. Elijah Garcia has been on a tear. He ended up coming down with some type of illness leading to the fight, and the fight got canceled. May possibly get postponed for a future PBC event, but at the moment, it got canceled. No replacements. It was such a last-minute thing that it just got pulled. We go to the co-main event, where a lot of people were really tuned into this. And the 140-pound division, you guys hear me say how hot that division is, and you guys know it very well. Rolly Romero being one of the 4 champions, stepping into the ring on this night with the WBA title around his waist. The other champions, Devin Haney, who's putting his title on the line against Ryan Garcia. Subriel Matias with the IBF. Teofimo with the WBO. Subriel Matias is going to be fighting Liam Perrell, the Australian sensation at 140 pounds. A lot of people think that he's the most complete fighter coming out of Australia at the moment, especially for that division. We had an Australian fighting the night prior against Oscar Valdez and Liam Wilson at 130 pounds, just 10 pounds south from this division. So Liam Perrell will be fighting Subriel Matias. Haney Garcia are getting in there. You got Lindolfo Delgado, who was 24 hours removed from his victory. You got Arnold Barbosa, who's a newly signee for Golden Boy. He's going to be debuting as a co-main event of Haney Garcia. You got Jose Ramirez still in the mix. You got Josh Taylor still in the mix against Jack Catterall, getting it on sometime in May. You got a lot of movement in that 140-pound division. Richardson Hitchens. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Rolly Romero puts his title on the line against Pitbull, who was coming up from the lightweight division to the super lightweight or junior welterweight division at 140 pounds. Gets in the ring, and a fight where many picked Pitbull to just demolish Rolly Romero. You have to say that they picked right. And if you were one of those, congratulations, because you know your boxing. Pitbull went in there. Rolly Romero tasted the power of Pitbull, the onslaught, the assault of Pitbull immediately. Pitbull closes in the distance and begins unleashing that power. Rolly Romero felt the power. The curious thing about this is that Rolly Romero, a lot of people were saying that this is possibly the best fight that he's had in a long time because he had to resort to his boxing. But from the very opening bell, when he started feeling and exchanging with Pitbull, he felt the power and never really managed to get into a rhythm, but rather find himself in survival mode. He had no other choice but to stick and move, to potshot Pitbull, try to eliminate exchanges, try to survive the exchanges. Pitbull kept coming forward and forward and forward and forward, and it was just overwhelming. It was smothering to think of putting your shoes in what Rolly Romero was experiencing inside that ring. The curious thing is that when you look at the judges' scorecards, they actually had Rolly Romero up on the scorecards. And we were very likely to be heading to a Rolly Romero decision once again. But there was no arguing that the stronger punches, the punches that were just sending Rolly Romero from one side of the ring to the other, the punches that were garnering the attention of the crowd on hand, that were getting the reactions from the commentators and the crowd, and everybody present, everybody witnessing, were coming from behalf of Pitbull. At least the prelim cards looked that way. As if Rolly Romero was going to be walking away with a decision. Pitbull took matters into his own hands. And by round 8, it was all she wrote. He brought the hammer down. and stopped Rolly Romero, lifting the title from him, announcing himself in the 140-pound division as another killer, as another shark, as the newly crowned WBA champion for the 140-pound division. And now we have two hard-hitting champions with two elusive boxers at the heap, in Subriel and Pitbull as the demolishers, and Haney and Teofimo as the elusive, higher developed, higher pedigree boxers. 140-pound division is insane at the moment. Rolly Romero seemed to be concussed. He did his best to compose himself during the post-fight interview, which it would have been best if they didn't even conduct that. Just let him go on his way. But Rolly Romero's out of the championship picture. Enter the era of Pitbull. And then we lead to the main event, where TSZYU and Sebastian Fundora, to wrap around how we began this whole episode, the towering inferno of Sebastian Fundora coming off of his knockout loss to Brian Mendoza, TSZYU coming off his victory over Brian Mendoza. Remember, Sebastian Fundora was in line to fight Jermell Charlo, had the interim to fight Jermell Charlo. Never happened. TSZYU knocking on the door of Jermell Charlo, never happened. Now these two were getting it on. There was a nasty elbow because of the height difference, because you knew that these styles were not going to cope well with one another because of the height, the reach, the very little time that they had to prepare for one another. So it was going to be a little bit sloppy until they each managed to find a rhythm. An elbow came crashing down from Sebastian Fundora, down on the head of TSZYU, which caused a huge gash. And this is where the controversy begins, because the blood did not stop raining. Did not stop raining on TSZYU's face. Both fighters were bloodied up from the conclusion of round one all the way to the closing bell. They hit each other with everything they had. Sebastian Fundora got busted up. His lips busted up, his mouth is bleeding, his nose is bleeding, his eyes were swelled. Fundora raining punches from top down. TSZYU starting to find success, and found a lot of success by dipping underneath and dodging the punches, the oncoming punches of Fundora, and lunging forward, sending multiple punches each time that he was able to lunge forward, and successfully landing on Sebastian Fundora. TSZYU started finding his rhythm, finding his way, but he was losing a lot of blood. A lot of people criticizing the judges. A lot of people not the judges, but the doctors on hand. What is the purpose of the doctors on hand if they weren't able to protect the fighter in this very same occasion, where it should have been stopped somewhat early and taken the fight to the scorecards? Or maybe even deemed it a no contest, which would have been very unpopular and a sad turn of events for the crowd on hand as the main event. But the purpose of them is to protect the fighter. TSZYU lost a lot of blood. Partial vision. That eye was pretty much done, covered in blood. Couldn't really see it. Fundora continued to land everything that he could, and they exchanged and beat each other up to a pulp. It was very, very entertaining. Yes, from a fan's perspective. It was a bloodbath. It was a slugfest. It was a rock'em sock'em robot type fight. You can't help but tip your hat off to TSZYU, who fought through adversity, who has a true Warriors champion, who had to answer those demons after the first round, who very well may have been debilitated. Of course he was. He had to have been feeling his legs suffering, his body overall from the blood loss, exhaustion, not just leading from the weight cut, as all fighters struggle once they're in there, but from the blood loss itself. The mind games that must have been going through TSZYU. But he answered a call. He saw the fight all the way through the end. The judges rendered a decision for Sebastian Fundora when it's all said and done, and TSZYU suffers a first defeat of his unblemished to date of his unblemished career. This is the first defeat, the first blemish on his record. He now sits at 24-1, 17 knockouts to his credit. Sebastian Fundora improves to 21-1 with 1 draw, 13 knockouts to his credit. And remember that 1 defeat came at the hands of Brian Mendoza in his very last outing. What a way to wrap everything around. And Sebastian Fundora is now your WBC and WBO champion of the 154-pound division. And he's going to be hell for anybody and everybody that steps in the ring with him, as he was before. Brian Mendoza figured him out. And I'm sure in a rematch, if TSZYU had this much success, with as many wrenches as they were thrown his way, and he found this much success against Fundora, in a fight that was literally came down to a couple of rounds that were given Fundora's way over TSZYU. In a rematch, I have no doubts that TSZYU may very well be able to figure him out, and who knows, maybe he'll even pull off the stoppage. But you know it's going to be another great fight between these two if they do sign the immediate rematch. And you know that Fundora is going to bring the fight. Even more so now that he's the champ. At the conclusion of the fight, Errol Spence was brought into the ring, and it seemed really odd because now they're lining up Errol Spence to fight Sebastian Fundora. Almost as an in-house PBC type move taking place. But all along, we've been hearing that Terrence Crawford was in line to fight the winner of the TSZYU Keith Thurman fight. So who knows if things changed the moment that Thurman exited and Fundora entered. The post-fight press conference, Sebastian Fundora was asked about this, and he said that it would be an honor for him to fight Errol Spence. But in his opinion, the best fighter out there is Terrence Crawford, and that's who he wants to face off against if it comes between Spence and Crawford. Samson Lakowicz, his promoter, said that they're going to be in immediate talks with TSZYU to try to run this back because it was that great of a fight. And in the end, 4 title fights. Lara defends, Julio Cesar Martinez defends, Serhii Bohachuk, the new interim champ, Sebastian Fundora, a 2-belt champ, and what other title was on there? What am I forgetting? Isaac Cruz, how am I forgetting? It's almost like I'm the one concussed. Pitbull Cruz, the new 140-pound champ. So many titles on the line. And listen, if everybody wants to criticize the PBC move with Amazon and that they just threw their entire stable here just for the sake of putting on a successful card, congratulations to them because it was entertaining as hell. All these titles that were on the line, great. There's movement. Nobody's sitting holding these titles hostage. There's a lot of movement. Titles change hands. Very entertaining, and there's new, fresh air, new blood in the 154-pound division post-Jermell Charlo era. A new champ at 140 that just muddied the waters for everybody else, and or made it more interesting. Erislandy Lara successfully defending at 160. Maybe we'll have a showdown with him and Jermall, or with Janibek. Who knows? Unlikely with Janibek, but I definitely see him and Jermall, who were former stablemates at one point under Ronnie Shields. Maybe they'll get it on and unify the WBA, WBC. or both vacate. And then we have plenty of up-and-coming fighters, young fighters that are willing to take that throne and take a stab at it. Rolly Romero has now exited. Pitbull enters. And we'll see how long Pitbull could keep that title around his waist. Amazing, amazing, amazing events, all in all. And for those that were critiquing and hating on this, listen, it delivered. They figured it out, they put it together, and they delivered. My hat's off to PBC and their debut card with Amazon Prime. The winners were us, the fans, and you guys know it. You guys witnessed it. This wasn't a sham. This was awesome. It was awesome from beginning to end. Great talent, great performances through and through. The crowd left happy. And our brains are just going now, full speed, trying to matchmake ourselves and figure out who's going to be getting in the ring with whom next. A lot of curveballs thrown. Amazing weekend for boxing. So congratulations to all the champions, to all the winners. Congratulations to PBC. Let's hope that they have a good run with Amazon Prime. Their very next card seems to be Gervonta Davis and Frank Martin. It looks like it may be a co-main event type of card where David Benavidez may be on that same co-main event where Gervonta Davis fighting Alexander Govsdik, or maybe either on the co-main event or on the undercard. David Benavidez Govsdik, that would be at 175, the former light heavyweight champion who lost his title at the hands of Beterbiev, welcoming Benavidez into the light heavyweight division. And a Benavidez who's no longer willing to sit around and wait for Canelo. Canelo, of course, in that big showdown coming up next month against Jaime Munguia, putting all his titles on the line. And Gervonta Davis and Frank Martin. Remember, Frank Martin out of the Derek James stable. Frank Martin pulled out of that fight with Shakur Stevenson late last year. Shakur ended up fighting Edwin de los Santos, which was a snooze fest. But Frank Martin is back in, and now he managed to land an even bigger opponent in the name of Tank Davis. Frank Martin is a solid fighter. And if he prepares right, he could give Gervonta Davis headaches. Let's hope that PBC continues on this route because it was an awesome card. It was an awesome card, and through and through, action-packed, and that's what we want as boxing fans. That's exactly what we want. So I thank you guys for continuously tuning in, for downloading, for sharing, for spreading the word. The show continues to grow, and with you guys' help, I'll continue trying to get myself into some of these events and bring you guys better content. As you guys know, as this fight was taking place, it was 24 hours removed from my being out in the Phoenix area, where I managed to cover the Oscar Valdez Liam Wilson card and Seniesa Yocasta Valle. So I was still traveling back home, and I ended up catching all these fights very late on Saturday night on replay. They had already taken place, and I ignored everybody's texts and calls. I didn't want to know anything about this. I wanted to watch them. I wanted to watch them quietly. I wanted to watch them and internalize and analyze, and it was awesome. And I got to do it very late at night on Saturday night, but it delivered, man. In my opinion, it was awesome. So I thank you guys again. Have yourselves a great night, and I'll continue delivering these recap episodes because we have a lot of boxing to talk about that took place this past weekend. So I'll leave you guys with that. Take care. Have a good night.